Hey,
Hey,
how's it going?
it's going. Oh,
So, it seems like we have a few people in here already, so that's always good. So I'm just gonna get started, okay?
sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, so for those of you who are here, thank you so much for joining us again for another Real Talk. Today I have Shabnam. She is one of our youth speakers, has an incredible story, and yeah, we're gonna have a lot of great things to talk about. We're gonna be talking about mental health. We're gonna be talking about some things like trauma, intergenerational trauma, those sorts of things. Um, but before I get into everything, I just like to give a shout out to our sponsors, TD Bank Group, for helping us with bringing all of our programming online. We couldn't be able to do it without them. And yeah, we're just so happy for all of you to be here. So without further ado, I'm just gonna let Shebnab introduce herself a little bit.
Hey guys, so my name is Shabnam, and I'm one of the speakers at YouthSpeak. I've been with YouthSpeak for a few months now. I believe I started around February, I would say. Done a few speeches till now, and it's been a great experience. Um, I am an Afghan Canadian, and my parents, we used to live in India, and we immigrated to Canada about 20 years ago now. So, my story involves a lot around my own personal traumas that I faced as a child. I went through several traumatic experiences, and also surrounding the trauma that I faced with, I guess you could say, immigrating to Canada, to a new land, and having to, relocate so many times while immigrating. So the challenges of, intergenerational trauma, because of all the stuff that my family and my community have gone through in the past as well. So there's quite a bit in my story, and that's pretty much what we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to pass it back to Adam right now.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So yeah, you talked a lot about. Oh yeah, and also before we begin, I'd like to let everybody know if you have any questions, anything you want to ask either myself or Shabnam, or just anything you'd like to share, you can put it into into the comment box over here. You can ask any question. We are going to be talking about some sensitive issues, like such as like something like trauma, intergenerational trauma, and we just know that this can be a safe place for you, but we just ask that like if there's anything you feel like might be oversharing, maybe be mindful of other people who are also watching too. Um, yeah, we just want everybody to feel very comfortable. Mhm. So you talked a lot about things like trauma you faced as a child, intergenerational trauma, things that um, kind of like affected you as you grew up. So since we're going to be talking about this today a bit, I want to start out by asking you, what's your personal definition of trauma? Like, what does that mean to you?
To be honest, Adam, that definition has changed over time. But one of the best ways that I can describe it, and you already know I'm a poet, so I
Yeah.
like to kind of speak in metaphors a bit. So to me, um, trauma is literally like life hitting you with a force and putting literally a crack in your identity.
Mm,
Okay, especially as a child, the younger it hits you, the more of an effect it has.
mhm.
And sometimes that crack, you feel it right away, and sometimes you don't feel it until it spreads throughout the rest of you. And then sometimes it just shatters. And I feel
Yeah.
like trauma, one way or another, leaves an effect that you're never the same, you know? And there's definitely ways around it, but you're never the same. It changes who you are.
Mhm. I think that was greatly put, like very, very poetic, of course. Like the the fact that you I like what you said about like the whole it's like a crack in your identity. It's like almost like when you break a bowl and you know it's shattered, you can glue that bowl back together, but it's not going to be the same.
Never the same.
Mhm.
Or like your
Um,
windshield, when you don't fix that little crack right away, then it just
yeah,
breaks.
yeah, like your new car.
There goes two, $300.
Yeah, like definitely the ways that I've heard trauma being explained as is almost like it's like when you get wounded like physically and how if it's a deep enough wound your body's going to heal the same or there's going to be scar tissue and that might
Yep.
make it so that your body moves differently. Like I know
That was
I
my
have like
initial
a shoulder injury.
interpretation. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a very good one.
I can be poetic too.
Yes, I see that. I see that.
So yeah, like I have, for example, I have a shoulder injury, and like sometimes it slips out of this joint, but and like I had to go to like rehab, rehabilitate, like for physiotherapy, and like even though it's like better, it's like it's never gonna be the same. I think trauma is like a
Ah, amen
similar
to
to
that. I have the same thing with my back. Oh man.
it.
Scar tissue. That's pretty much all it is. I know.
Mhm. And like there's definitely different types. There are definitely different types of trauma. I know that like there's like, what's called acute trauma where it's like you experience some like one thing that's like really like pivotal and kind of like affects you for your whole life. But then there's also like more chronic or like complex trauma where you're like when you're in a situation or you're in an environment that is kind of like not the best for you and a little bit toxic for you, and that can like slowly kind of like wear away at you over time. So, what sort of, for you, what sort of type of trauma do you feel? Do you think it was more acute, more just your situation, more just like your family situation?
Um, so when it comes to my personal traumas, for me, it's always been chronic, and I've actually, after going to therapy, it's been recognized that I went through complex PTSD,
Hmm.
which is a series of traumatic events, over and over. So it's literally feeling like you haven't recovered from one thing and you just get hit with something else
Yeah.
over and over again. So over time, that's literally how it went for me. Sure, it started with acute, but honestly, I don't even know at this point in my life if I would define any of my trauma as acute. It's all
Hmm.
chronic, and I went through it over time. Now, with my intergenerational trauma, to be honest, I could say it's chronic, but I could also say it's situational because a lot of the trauma that was passed down to me through my family, it wasn't intentional, of course.
Hmm.
A lot of it had to do with our socioeconomic status.
Hmm.
Then it had to do with the fact that we were in a new land, and it wasn't the first time they had to relocate, since they had to leave my country for war, Afghanistan, and all that. So they had already seen these things. It was my first time seeing it. And then even when I came here, my first year here, I had to relocate my schools 4 times. I was 11 going 12 years old, so it's pretty hard to hit. My first trauma that happened to me, I was like 3. So
Hmm.
that's a very pivotal, not pivotal, that's a very significant time in a child's life. That's where you develop who you are. So for me, it just kind of changed the game altogether. Since then it's just kind of trying to figure it out over and over again. So I would say chronic, more or less, the overall picture.
Okay. Yeah, that's very like apt description. Yeah, and
I hope
I
so.
like how I like how you talk about the intergenerational trauma. For also for those of you watching who like don't really know what intergenerational trauma is, that's like kind of like trauma that's passed through generations, like from either your grandfather to your parent to back to you, like things that like these sorts of like things that we carry throughout our family. And I like how you talked about that because it kind of like touches on how like someone's social location, like being a newcomer, what culture they come from can kind of affect their mental health in a way
Of course.
that's unique to them
Yep.
100%. So like you were saying how the fact that your family had to like move from a different place, be in a different land, being in a different country, how that really affected the way that they were able to deal with certain things. So yeah.
In my case, I'd like to add to that, it was also just the situational trauma also had to do with the fact that my own father was going through a lot of mental health issues.
Hmm.
And again, it comes down to intergenerational trauma where, a lot of me and my older sibling, we kind of spent a long time trying to fix everything for him. and it just
Mm-hmm.
kind of seeped down to us. So I
Yeah.
would also define intergenerational trauma as basically what our ancestors have not healed from. So just
Mm-hmm.
you're just passing the ball, passing the
Yeah,
ball
you're
until
just passing
somebody's
it
like,
down.
let me stop for a second, and let me try to figure out why I have this ball.
Yeah.
I
But
like
that
that. I
makes it
actually came up with that right now. All right, all
no,
right.
yeah, I like it too. And it makes our healing so much more important.
Yeah,
Because the when we heal ourselves, we're healing our whole family, and we got to think about what we're gonna pass down to our children, even if we
exactly,
choose to have children.
exactly.
Hmm.
There you go.
Hmm. All right. And so the next thing I wanted to really ask you was like, so like dealing with all this like sort of like chronic trauma, in your early life, like what were the ways that you found that you coped with it? And like you can see even like good and bad ways that you coped with it.
So earlier on in my life, I actually didn't even know how to cope with it. I had, I guess I would call them negative coping mechanisms where they weren't so much helpful, but more so acted like a band-aid for
Hmm.
everything that I was feeling. So I would isolate myself a lot.
Hmm.
I had a lot of trouble making friends. I didn't even know how to talk to people. So I would isolate myself a lot. I wouldn't talk that much. I also got bullied in middle school, I would say in the beginning, the first 2 years. And by the third year, I kind of got, let's just say I was able to manage better. But
Hmm.
because of that, also, I kind of built up this guard. So I was always guarded. That was
Yeah.
my biggest coping mechanism. Now, I know that it's not necessarily negative. It can be if you don't manage it well, in my opinion. But my biggest thing was always having my guard up, being like this sarcastic one and this tough little girl. No one can mess with you. Always having this like really like scary face.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never smiling. So never smiling. That definitely
Yeah.
added to
Yeah.
the
I can see that
intimidation
change.
factor. Basically just giving off this vibe to everybody that came around me that, you know what, just back off.
Hmm.
And that's where I mean that guard can become really negative
Hmm.
if you don't know what it's up for. There were some good coping mechanisms, though. I listened to a lot of music,
Hmm.
variety of genres. Listen to a lot of music. I used to sketch, so and I started writing poetry at a young age. So all of these little artistic outlets really helped me sort of basically ground myself when
Hmm.
I was really feeling it. But back then, I didn't ask for help when I really had a lot of opportunities. I didn't talk to a lot of my teachers. I mean, I talked to them about many things, but I didn't talk to them specifically about what I'm going through. Obviously, a lot of that had to do with the trust factor. I didn't trust anybody.
Hmm.
So because I didn't ask for the help back then, it really kind of had a domino effect. But those were like some of the few mechanisms I used to have back then. Obviously now I have more, but that was then.
Yeah, did you feel like these like the negative ones were like more about like trying to protect yourself, like kind of like
Oh,
put
100%, 100%. That wall was high and
yeah.
there was another wall behind it and then a little one
Uh-huh.
behind that and a little
Uh-huh.
one behind that.
Yeah.
Um, but that's what you do, when you go through trauma as a child, I feel like you build, especially as a child, you build all these barriers around you because you don't know how else to protect yourself. It's
Yeah.
either on this side of the extreme or the other. So
Hmm.
that's basically the experience I had where I just always had my guard up. I never let it down.
Hmm.
And you can imagine how exhausting that was. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had that on for a very long time. And it was definitely to protect myself because no matter what facade I had going on outside, I was really scared inside. Like I
Mm.
was just still that little kid, always.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's like it's kind of like you kind of have this like hyper vigilance because I feel like
Oh yeah.
it's a reaction to like if something bad happens is happening to you or happened to you, you don't want that to happen again. So you're kind of like always on guard, always like looking out.
It's
You
very
feel just like
simple.
very unsafe.
Sorry to cut you off. It's
Yeah,
very
no
simple.
worries.
Like I'll give you an example. I At least I didn't think I had any enemies or anybody after the bullying because once I put my guard up, there was no bullying. But I always, no matter where I was, no matter what time of day, I would always walk and I'd always be looking over my shoulder.
Hmm.
There was no one there. There was no one following me or anything like that. I just always felt this, like you said, I was very hyper vigilant. I felt like I had to constantly watch my back. I had to constantly make sure no one's coming to hurt me and things like that. And I didn't realize a lot of this, how bad it was back then. Over the
Mhm.
years, I realized exactly how much energy went into this, putting up this guard and being just always extra aware, hyper vigilant is the perfect word actually. Just
Mhm.
oh,
Mhm.
hyper vigilant at all
Yeah.
times. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Like, and you're just a kid.
Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of like that scar tissue that like you're kind of like
Mm.
you trying to protect yourself from something that's like, not happening anymore, but like your brain has that memory of
The
like
wheels are
of like
still spinning.
But it's good that I feel like it's good that you were able to find these like positive coping tools, like like you were saying, like sketching and like poetry and like the poetry. It's led to good things for you. And
Mm.
so did you feel that you were drawn to these sorts of like artistic coping skills because they kind of like provided like you a safe space to like deal with the things that you were feeling on the inside
Well,
or
for sure, for sure.
Mhm.
I'm just, it's coming back to me right now, why I started writing poetry as much as I did back then, because I didn't want to write a diary because
Mhm.
I'm like, what if my parents find it?
Yeah.
You know, and especially with immigrant families, I don't know how many people can relate to this, but I've found in a lot of immigrant families, the parents like to know everything.
Mhm.
I don't
Problem
know
with
if that's just
boundaries.
specific to immigrant families, but they're very, very, they like to know everything. So if you have a diary, they'll find it.
They might
You know
find
what
it.
I mean? And despite the language barrier, because obviously my mother doesn't speak English very well or read it,
Mhm.
um, but my father did and my older brother did and all that. So I was always worried about them finding my diary, and there's a lot they didn't know. I hadn't shared
Mhm.
anything with them, so I was scared that anything I would write, what if they find it and then they go into this shock and
Mhm.
it just starts a whole other snowball effect,
Mhm.
and I just didn't want anybody to privy in my thoughts. So I started writing poetry, and the way that I wrote it, of course, it was abstract,
Yeah.
and
So no one could
they didn't
really like
know that that was, me.
yeah.
So that was why I was drawn to poetry. Of course, it was also the ambience of it all and the flow, and just it just spoke to me. Like I still do it to this day. Um,
Mhm. That's
but
amazing.
it's just funny.
Also,
It's just funny that that's why I started.
we have a comment from Allison saying that your poetry is beautiful.
Oh,
So
hey, Allison, thank you. Yes, I have a
hmm
little fan.
yes. So
I
yeah,
appreciate that.
definitely, you definitely, and I've heard you speak, and I'm pretty sure I've heard you do some spoken word, and like it's definitely a great outlet, poetry, like for like just
No,
to
it
say the
is.
things that you might not have other words be able to say, like conventionally.
Yeah. Like it's not, of course it's not for everyone. So I know that a lot of people, they hear poetry and they're like, but I can't like do that. I can't put this word with this word and that flow with that flow.
Hmm
Like they just get so stressed out and get anxious.
hmm
It's not for everyone, but if it is and you get drawn to it, even simple poetry, it doesn't have to be extravagant. People read all these current like poets going on in the books and the famous ones, and they're like, oh my God, I can't write like that, so I probably hate poetry. No,
hmm
you start simple, just a little rhyming and everything, and you just
Yeah.
feel everything that you put on paper. It's like somebody told me once, literally when you write something, especially if it's about something that you're feeling, it's like your brain is feeling like you're releasing it. There's like a whole
hmm
circuit. It's being
hmm
released through your fingers onto that paper. I mean,
hmm
that's the whole concept of an outlet, right? So
Yeah.
poetry is definitely a very great tool to use if it's definitely your calling. And any kind of artistic sort of outlet, I feel like it really helps. Something as simple as just, I mean, today I went out and bought a coloring book just because,
Yeah.
like lately, I've had some anxiety and all of that. So I
hmm
find uh, doing coloring
hmm
books, really helps you focus that energy and sort of like dissipate the negative aura.
Yeah. Kind of like get everything that's like going on inside here, and like once again, like you said, like a release, and like a release in a safe way. because like you said, like sometimes we don't feel like we can talk to people about the things that we're going through, like it's even our families. Like if any of you out there, like just like posing a question to all of you who are watching, if anyone has anyone here felt like they haven't been able to talk to their family about mental health or anything that they were going through. Just if you want to write a yes or a no, but like yeah, we have a few comments too.
I see that.
We have since I think it's Fletcher saying, stay true to yourself and your story. Very, very true. And we have Asma, I think, and she's saying, writing is such an amazing outlet. And just a lot of positive things. And
Thanks,
obviously it seems
guys.
that like just hearing you talk about poetry, I can feel how like passionate you are and how close to the heart it is for you. So I'm so glad that you've been able to use that as a way to work through your past traumas and all that sort of stuff. Mhm.
I always
So,
find passion comes in its most authentic self when you find your own authentic self. You know what I mean?
mhm,
Like when you become true to yourself and you listen to your call, the passion that comes out of that is really, really pure, you
mhm.
know? And it's very important to have that.
Yeah, like it's very, very important to have that because like it kind of like connects you to yourself. And so
Yeah.
with when so as you're talking about poetry and talking about all these like artistic ways to like kind of cope with your situation, would you describe that as part of the healing process for dealing with your traumas, your past trauma?
For sure, I would. When I used to use these coping strategies back in the day, um, whether it was the negative or the positive ones, it was literally like numerous band-aids. Okay.
Mm,
And the reason for that was they weren't entirely helping me. They were helping me release in the moment, but
mm,
I was back to the same thing the next day or the next week. And the reason
mm,
for that was I just didn't know exactly why, how deep my trauma ran and what was the main reasons for it and why I felt or what I felt as much as I
mm.
did. I actually going through, so I've started therapy this year after all this time, and I'm so grateful that I did and so proud of myself. But I actually
Congratulations.
learned, I learned, no, trust me, it's a big deal. I
No, it
used to
is.
make
It is. Like it's a
fun
big
of
step,
people who
but not a
would,
lot of people are
they
like can
don't,
even like
they
open
feel like they don't
themselves
need help.
up to do that. So when I say
Yeah, or
congratulations,
they're
I
too
really mean
proud, or they
congratulations.
just don't trust. And it's definitely really hard to find a good therapist. Don't get me wrong.
Hmm.
I walked away from several before. I didn't even make
Hmm.
it to the office. You know what I mean? It was very, very
Yeah.
hard that first step. But when I did, and I found someone now who I met at an actual event, she specializes in the traumas that I've been through, and that was basically what I used to break the ice, and it really, really helped me build a relationship with her, knowing that
That's
she has worked with people who've been through the same traumas as me, and she has helped me a lot. I'm so grateful to her. Through her, I was able to learn that there were so many things that I didn't even know I was feeling.
yeah.
So there's something called the feelings wheel. So if you guys just Google, it's actually
Yeah.
called the feelings wheel. And you see it, it's like a wheel with like different feelings, and then there's subcategories of feelings in those feelings and so on and so on. And I'm like, oh my God, like what? And I'm looking at this thing, and she told me to use it a lot in the beginning because every time I'd be like, I don't know what I'm feeling, or I think I'm feeling this, but I'm feeling that. And she's like, use the wheel. Use the wheel.
Mhm. Mhm. That's a
And
very good way.
that's yeah, but that's how much of an effect trauma can have on you, especially as a child, especially if you go through trauma within the first 10 years of your life. Um, it impedes your development process. You know,
Hmm.
it's that time where you develop a sense of who you are, what you like, how do
Hmm.
you think, or how do you build trust? You know what I mean? So it's
Hmm.
a very important time in your life, and it was definitely impeded. Like it was not a very good time for me because obviously it was impeded quite a few times, and because of that, I there were so many times where I just didn't even know what I was feeling, and I
Hmm.
always kind of went to the extremes. It's
Yeah.
either I was really happy or I was just damn depressed in the depths, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like, in my experience, I feel like a lot of people through trauma go through that. And when I started with this therapist, it really helped me fix that problem. Now I'm able to actually see what all the issues were step by step and actually heal that way. So now when I listen to music, I'm not always searching, for the sad lyrics.
Yeah.
I can actually listen to it and think, oh, these are some good lyrics, not just
Yeah.
sad good lyrics. They're good lyrics, it's
Yeah.
very good poetry. I can appreciate the poetry as opposed to it and I start crying and I'm like, that is so me. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're doing that every day and you're feeling that pain every day, something's wrong
Mhm.
and you have to seek the help that you deserve. No?
And it's good that you went and sought the help because a lot of people I like even me personally like when I was dealing with my own mental health struggles I wouldn't want to talk to anybody or and
Mhm.
I know that that can be even harder when you're dealing with trauma because once again you're talking about like hyper vigilance and your brain is always kind of sensitized to like oh is this gonna hurt me, is this gonna hurt me, I feel very unsafe, um, whether it be you go through physical trauma or emotional trauma, um, a lot of it can like make it so that you cannot open up to people and you cannot trust people. So it's just like even taking those first steps is just such like a leap of faith. Um,
Oh, yeah. A big one.
and and you were talking about some of the things that your therapist did to like kind of like build to make you trust them. Were there anything specific other than the fact that they had worked with other people who they specialize with people with trauma, or was there anything that they
So,
specifically did or said?
so to be honest, for me personally, I there was a time where I wouldn't have trusted any therapist regardless of what they said. I was one of the
Mhm.
people who'd be like, I know exactly what they're gonna say to me. Oh, I
Mhm.
know better than them. Oh, they don't even know what I've been through. Like all the, stereotypical questions that go through your mind
Yeah.
when you've gone through trauma. And I personally was at by the time I reached out to her, I had enough. And I
Mhm.
was ready to just open up. And
Mhm.
when I heard that she had already had experiences with people who'd been through the same trauma as me, like really specialized in it,
Mhm.
she had already gained a part of my trust. Because the research really helps. Obviously, knowing where
Mhm.
they're coming from, their experiences, um, what they've done. So it's not that she's only done therapy with these guys. She's worked in like camps and different areas, and she's been on the ground sometimes. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like actually going into situations and working with the victims and things like that.
Yeah. Like actually
So,
in the field,
sorry.
like actually in the field with like people who.
So knowing
Mhm.
that knowing these things about her definitely made it a lot easier to hold these conversations. Um and the easiest thing the thing that helped me the most was the fact that I stayed open. She actually didn't expect me to stick around based on my
Mhm.
personality and based on what I already told her about me. She didn't expect me to stick around.
Did
So when
you
I
did you
called
say
her
that to
after our
you?
first appointment, she's like, "Huh?" and then and then I kept booking. I kept booking every week, once a week. I go, and she's actually so proud of me because the fact that I actually stuck around and I'm actually listening and I'm
Mhm.
following the prompt she's giving me. There are times, don't get me wrong, it's not that I always agree with her, but I
Mhm.
look at the overall picture and I take what I can from it.
Mhm.
She gives me the tools when I need the tools to kind of calm myself if I'm having anxiety, if I'm having these kind of issues. And sometimes she just sits there and lets me vent. And
Mhm.
I can trust her judgment because I know she has had so much experience in this field. And she will give me advice that's impartial.
Mhm.
She'll give me advice that's impartial that will help me in a way to just help me reflect. She asks me the right questions and then leaves me to figure out the rest, which I like. Whereas some therapists, they just tell you what to do, which
Yeah.
I don't think helps.
Yeah, you want to be able to get to that realization yourself, because or else you're not
Yeah,
going to learn anything.
it's very important.
Okay, that's that. Well, I'm really happy that you found a therapist who's the right fit, because like once again, it's like very very hard and very
Oh,
very
yeah.
important for us for like people who like I think just anybody, not only people who have been going through like trauma issues, just anybody like to go to actually like reevaluate who they are. Like I know. even therapists have therapists, so like nobody is
Yeah,
above therapy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody needs someone, you know?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
We all have a
100%.
story.
All right. So the last question I just wanted to ask you was, so for somebody who, if someone has a friend or like a loved one who's kind of like going through a similar thing that you went through with like trauma, and things like that, what would you say to them? What would you find helpful? What are some helpful things that they could do to help somebody going through a similar situation that you went through?
So I can tell you the things that I wanted from my friends. Didn't necessarily get them every time at the time that I needed. But the things I wanted, the first thing I wanted was for them to just listen.
Hmm.
A lot of people, they think that when someone's confiding in them, regardless of the subject matter, they have to give them advice. For
Hmm.
someone with trauma, that's a very negative path to go on right off the bat, because especially if you haven't even heard their entire story, if you don't know enough about it, people just need to vent, humor them. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? I wanted people to just let me vent, and then if I needed to vent more than once, to let me vent, and then just be there. Sometimes I just wanted them to sit there with me and let me just go through the process on my own.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And sometimes I just wanted them to ask me questions. What can I do for you? What can I do to make this easier, to make you feel safe? That
Hmm.
was the trigger word, not trigger word, the main thing that I always looked for. What can I do to make you feel safe?
Hmm.
Or what can I do to make you not feel,
Not
like,
safe.
sometimes people, they get so, especially with trauma, they're so on the edge. They're like, I don't know what to do. Everything I do, there's kind of, it sets them off.
Mhm.
Understand, maybe do a little bit of research if you really care about this friend. Do a
Mhm.
little bit of research on things like PTSD, anxiety, whatever they have,
Yeah.
and understand it a bit. And that will, I feel, in my opinion, make it easier for them to trust you when they see that kind of care, that kind of attention coming from you, to just try to understand what they're going through, at least on that level, and then just listen and try to get them help. Ask them if they want you to just go to a professional with them, sometimes, but that would be a very far step. It just starts with listening.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really liked how what you said about like the whole safety thing because like I feel like that's just the baseline to everything. Like I feel like most people are familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and even in that model, like safety before everything, before connection, before even love, we have to feel safe before we need anything else. So yeah, safety is
It's half
definitely
the
really
battle.
important. Hmm. And yeah, so I wanted did want to pose a question to like the audience too. Is like, if for all of you out there, what sort of things do you think creates a safe space? Because I know all of us need different things for safety. Like I know, one of my friends, they for them to feel safe, they need a pillow on their back. Like it's
Mhm.
something like something on their back
Yeah.
to like make them feel safe. Because I feel like and I feel like it's because of that they feel exposed if there's nothing on their back. For me to feel safe, I need to make sure that the person who I'm talking to is not judgmental. Um, and so yeah, I think we all need different things for safety. So like if anyone out there has anything that makes them feel safe and is willing to share that with us, it'd be perfect if you want to share. If not, that's also okay.
Yeah. I think, like I said, safety is half the battle. So if someone doesn't feel safe to begin with, you're not going to get anywhere further with
Mm,
them. You know what I mean? Like, everyone wants to feel safe, and everyone deserves to feel safe. So if you want to be, let's say, a good friend, you try to ask them at least. If you can't figure it out, because a lot of people think others can just,
yeah,
especially when you've gone through trauma, you actually think others are thinking at the same frequency as you, and they're like,
yeah.
they'll figure it out. If they're good friends, they'll just figure it out. You know what I mean? I feel like they've gone through that, and I went through that. I don't know if everybody goes through that, to be honest, where I just felt like if they really care, they're spending time with me, they'll figure it out. They'll know that I
Yeah.
need this or I need that. It's just a part of trauma, but I would think that a good friend would try to be patient through that as much as
Mhm.
possible. As hard, it is very hard on the friend as well. But it's just they need to understand it's harder on the friend who's going through the trauma, and it's
Mhm.
just very important that they be there for them.
Yeah, and 100%. Like, I totally agree with all of that. And it seems like we have a few answers to the question from before. So I think Asma said um, that they feel safe when someone feeds them and sits with them when they cry. I definitely feel
Mm,
that. I know if any of my friends are going through something like sad, if they're even just going through a sad time, first thing I do is offer them a drink of water because like that's probably the easiest thing to offer
I do the
someone
same.
to
I
nourish
do the
them. And
same.
then I'll be like, "Do you want something to eat?" Because like food is like definitely
Yeah,
something
it's
we all can
comfort.
relate to. Like just yeah, it's comfort. Like it's
Yeah.
you know we all been fed by mom or dad or like just like any loved one. So like food is definitely a good one for safety. Um, we have someone else saying that if they also know their vulnerabilities too, that's also a big one. I definitely also feel that. I feel less
Oh yeah.
vulnerable if someone else has also shared something, maybe something vulnerable about themselves. I feel like I'm on an equal playing field as them. I'm just like, oh, it's not just me spilling my guts to you, and you know, that might make me feel even less safe. But when someone sits down with me and says like, hey, I've had similar thoughts. I've had similar feelings. Um, let me go first and show you how um, I've not had the best time. That's definitely a good way to make someone feel safe.
That's actually a big one for me.
Mhm.
And because I saw it so much when I was younger, I actually try to do that as much as I can with people that are close to me, like any close friends. I'm a lot more vulnerable now than I used to be before, like we mentioned, my guards, my multi-tiered guards.
Yeah.
So I can understand now why I was not as easily approachable back then, and people weren't able to share as much with me back then. But
Mhm.
now I find it's so much easier for them because I let them know that yes, I have felt trauma. I have felt alone. I have felt, like there was no one else there, or that I was on my own, or I was the only one going through it. All these different emotions, regardless of what you've gone through, there's so many emotions that kind of fall into the same category. Everybody goes through certain emotions when they go through trauma. And as soon as I start sharing these vulnerabilities, it makes them so much more trustworthy of me. You know,
Mhm.
I find it's a big, big deal.
Yeah. One, yes. Like I feel like I've personally connected with people the most when they've shared something like maybe a little bit vulnerable or like even when I've shared something that I felt someone might judge me for feeling or even like thinking. That's when I've made like the most powerful connections. And it really shows that like vulnerability is strength and that we should all learn to like kind of like, you know, let go, show a little bit of our true more of our true selves.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
All right, so Um, we're gonna wrap up soon, so if anyone out there has any questions for either Shabnam or me, or just like any comment they want to share, now would be a good time to share that. But other than that, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all you had to share about your story, your take on trauma, and all that sort of stuff. It was very, very valuable, and I'm just so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you,
Um,
Adam. I'm just so glad you did this, and I'm so glad you had me. Thank you so much.
oh, thank you, no, thank you. And yeah, so and just to wrap up, I just want to give once again another shout out to our sponsor, TD Bank Group. And I just want to say thank you all, everybody who came in to listen to us. I know people had to come in and out. It's a little bit long, but I just want to say thank you all for coming here and like listening to us. We do this every Monday and Tuesday, alternating. So if you like this one, drop by the next one. And I just want to say once again, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. You guys were awesome. Thanks, Asma. I see your comment.
Yeah.